The insurance check trembled in my hands as I stared at the return address. An oceanfront property in Belize where my mother was supposedly living her best life after faking her own death. The irony wasn't lost on me. A $2. $3 million life insurance payout for someone who wasn't actually dead. My fingers traced the embossed letterhead of Atlantic Trust Insurance as tears blurred my vision. For 3 years, I'd grieved a woman who had been sipping margaritas on a beach while I arranged her funeral and sorted through her belongings alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The revelation came in the form of a clerical error, a second policy disbursement notice with an attached beneficiary confirmation form showing my mother's signature dated just 2 weeks earlier. Not the digital signature from her will, but a fresh, handwritten one with the same distinctive loop in her Y that I'd recognize anywhere. The date stamp was undeniable proof. May 17, 2025. My mother, Veronica Reynolds, had been alive and well enough to sign legal documents 3 years after her supposed death in a boating accident off the coast of Florida. I placed the check on my kitchen counter, the marble surface that my mother had insisted I installed during the home renovation I'd undertaken with part of her initial insurance payout. "You'll thank me later," she'd said during our last conversation before the accident. Her voice tinged with what I now recognized as calculated affection. Quality finishes always pay off in the end. Her words now carried a sinister double meaning that made my stomach churn. The night my world collapsed began with a phone call from the Coast Guard. "Ms. Morgan, we've recovered a capsized vessel registered to your mother," the officer had said, his voice professionally somber. "I'm sorry to inform you that we've found personal effects, but no survivors." I'd collapsed onto my living room floor, phone clutched to my ear as the officer continued explaining search parameters and recovery efforts that would ultimately be fruitless. For days I sat by the phone waiting for a miracle, for news that they'd found her clinging to debris or washed up on a remote shore. When they recovered what they believed to be fragments of her clothing and her waterlogged identification, I had to accept the unthinkable that my vibrant, seemingly invincible mother was gone. The sea had claimed her, leaving me to face life without the woman who had raised me single-handedly after my father abandoned us when I was just 4 years old. What followed was a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence cards, and the suffocating weight of grief that made even breathing feel like an insurmountable task. Friends brought casseroles I couldn't eat and offered platitudes that did nothing to fill the gaping hole her absence had created. "She's in a better place," they'd say, or "time heals all wounds." I nodded and thanked them while internally screaming that no place could be better than here, with me, and that some wounds weren't meant to heal but to fester and consume. The insurance company moved with surprising efficiency, processing her claim within months. The notification of the $2.3 million payout arrived on a rainy Tuesday, the envelope growing damp in my trembling hands as I stood at the mailbox trying to comprehend the figure printed in cold, official type. It was a sum that simultaneously seemed both obscenely large and insultingly small as a price tag for my mother's life. My first thought wasn't about what I would do with the money, but rather a flood of questions about why my mother, a high school English teacher who claimed to live paycheck to paycheck, had maintained such a substantial policy. She'd always emphasized the importance of financial security, drilling into me lessons about saving and investing that I'd followed dutifully throughout my 20s. But this revelation painted those lectures in a new, contradictory light. There had been subtle signs I'd missed, moments that should have raised questions, but that grief had blinded me to. The locked filing cabinet in her home office that mysteriously disappeared before I could sort through it. The casual mention of a friend who would handle certain aspects of her estate. The surprise revelation from her attorney that she'd updated her will just 3 weeks before the accident, ensuring everything transferred to me smoothly. I'd attributed these oddities to my mother's practical nature, her lifelong habit of planning for every contingency. "Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst," she'd repeat like a personal mantra throughout my childhood. It had never occurred to me that she might be preparing to orchestrate the worst herself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I stood in my kitchen staring at the insurance check and the damning signature, A lifetime of memories shifted and rearranged themselves like puzzle pieces falling into a disturbing new pattern. The swimming lessons she'd insisted on despite my fear of water. The offshore account she'd helped me set up, for emergencies only. The obsessive documentation of our possessions, in case of disaster. Each memory now felt less like maternal care, and more like calculated steps in a master plan I'd never been privy to. The woman who had taught me to value honesty above all else, who had grounded me for a week when I lied about breaking a neighbor's window at 11, had perpetrated the ultimate deception. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, hollowing me out until I felt like nothing more than a shell of the person I'd been, just hours before opening that envelope. I picked up my phone, hands still trembling, and dialed the number of Detective Marcus Reynolds, no relation to us but a man who had shown extraordinary kindness during the investigation of my mother's disappearance. He had been the one to bring me her waterlogged wallet, sitting patiently while I sobbed over the faded photo of the two of us she'd carried for decades. "Eleanor?" he answered on the third ring, his voice instantly concerned. "Everything okay?" In the 3 years since my mother's death, he'd checked on me periodically, becoming something of a surrogate father figure in the process. "She's alive," I said, the words catching in my throat. "My mother faked her death, and I can prove it." The silence on the other end stretched until I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he cleared his throat. "That's a serious allegation. What evidence do you have?" I explained about the second policy disbursement, the recent signature, the mounting inconsistencies that had plagued me even through the fog of grief. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "I always thought something was off about that case," he admitted. "The boat was too perfectly capsized, the personal effects too conveniently scattered, but without a body or witnesses, we had no choice but to rule it an accidental death." "I need to find her," I said, my initial shock hardening into resolve. "Will you help me?" "Officially, I can't reopen a closed case without substantial evidence," he replied carefully. "But off the record, I think you deserve answers. Come by the station tomorrow, bring everything you have, and we'll talk options." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen island staring at the insurance check as if it might spontaneously combust. The money that had once represented the final, terrible severing of my relationship with my mother now felt like a mocking reminder that she had chosen to sever it herself, deliberately and with calculation. My mother and I had always been unusually close, a team of two against the world after my father walked out. She'd worked 2 jobs to put me through college, celebrating my achievements as if they were her own. When I landed my first major client at the marketing firm, she'd taken me out for champagne and strawberries, her pride radiating like physical warmth between us. "You're everything I've worked for," she'd said that night, squeezing my hand across the table. My greatest accomplishment. I'd basked in her approval, never questioning the intensity of her investment in my success. Now I wondered if I'd been nothing more than a long-term project, a box to check on her life's to-do list before moving on to her real priorities, whatever those might be. The next morning, I drove to the police station with a folder containing the insurance documents, copies of my mother's will, and photographs of her signature across various documents spanning decades. Detective Reynolds met me in the lobby, his salt and pepper hair more salt than when I'd last seen him, the creases around his eyes deeper. "Let's grab coffee," he suggested, guiding me toward a small cafe across the street rather than into the station. Once seated in a corner booth, he explained, "This conversation needs to happen off the record first. If we're right about this, it involves multiple felonies across state lines. That means federal jurisdiction, which complicates things." I nodded, understanding the subtext. He was protecting himself professionally while still trying to help me. As we pored over the documents, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "The signature comparison is compelling," he admitted, examining the recent form beside an old birthday card my mother had written me. "And the timing of the policy increases before her disappearance raises red flags. She tripled her coverage 6 months before the accident." "So you believe me?" I asked, desperate for validation that I wasn't crazy, that the foundation of my grief hadn't been built on an elaborate lie. "I do," he said grimly. "And if I'm being honest, Eleanor, this level of premeditation suggests she had help. Professional help. The implication hung between us. My mother hadn't acted alone. Someone had assisted her in creating a new identity, laundering insurance money, establishing herself in another country." The scope of the deception expanded with each passing moment, spiraling outward to include unknown conspirators. "I have contacts at the FBI," Detective Reynolds continued, keeping his voice low. "White-collar crime division. This falls squarely in their wheelhouse. Insurance fraud, potential identity theft, tax evasion." "I don't want her in prison," I blurted, surprising myself with the admission. Despite everything, some stubborn part of me still clung to the bond we'd shared, reluctant to be the instrument of her downfall. "I just want to know why she would leave me grieving while she started a new life somewhere else." The detective's expression softened. "The why might be the hardest part to uncover, Eleanor. People capable of this kind of deception rarely have simple motivations, but finding her is the first step." As he made calls to his FBI contact from outside the cafe, I sat staring into my cooling coffee, trying to reconcile the mother I thought I knew with the woman who could orchestrate such a betrayal. The memories I'd cherished now seemed suspect, potentially nothing more than carefully constructed scenes in a lifelong performance. Had she ever truly loved me, or had I been merely a convenient accessory to her public persona, a prop she could discard when it no longer served her purpose? The questions churned in my stomach, souring the little coffee I'd managed to drink. Detective Reynolds returned, sliding a business card across the table. "Special Agent Diane Foster. She wants to meet tomorrow morning. She's very interested in your case." "That was fast," I remarked, tucking the card into my wallet. "Insurance fraud on this scale gets attention," he replied, "especially when the perpetrator might still be out there enjoying the proceeds." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, pausing at the framed photos of my mother and me that still adorned the walls despite 3 years of grief. Her smile seemed different now, calculating rather than warm, her eyes assessing rather than loving. I took each frame down, stacking them face down on my dining table, unable to bear their scrutiny. In my restlessness, I found myself opening her old laptop, which I'd kept but rarely used since her death. The password prompt glowed accusingly, and on impulse I typed in "New Life Belize," a wild guess based on the return address from the insurance documents. To my shock, the screen unlocked, revealing her desktop. My hands trembled as I navigated through folders, most containing ordinary documents, recipes, book club reading lists, faculty meeting notes from her teaching days. But a folder labeled simply E drew my attention. Inside were dozens of documents spanning my entire life. Scanned copies of my birth certificate, social security card, passport, driver's license, financial statements from accounts I didn't know existed, detailed notes about my habits, preferences, relationships. It was a comprehensive dossier on me, maintained with chilling thoroughness. The final document in the folder was a letter addressed to me, dated 1 week before her disappearance. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, something has gone very wrong. This was never supposed to touch you. I've worked too hard to keep you insulated from the realities of my life. What you need to understand is that Veronica Reynolds was always a temporary identity, one of several I've inhabited. The circumstances that forced me into this life predated you, but once you arrived, I couldn't bear to drag you into it. The insurance money is yours, free and clear. Use it to build the life you deserve, the stable foundation I never had. Don't look for me. If certain people realize I'm still alive, we'll both be in danger. I did love you, in my way. Perhaps the only genuine love I've ever felt. But some habits of survival run too deep to break, even for love. V." I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the cryptic message until the words blurred together. The letter offered more questions than answers, hinting at a past shrouded in danger and deception that stretched back before my birth. Who was my mother, really? What certain people posed such a threat that she would abandon her only child and start anew? The foundations of my identity crumbled beneath me as I confronted the possibility that everything I knew about my origins might be fiction. Sleep eventually claimed me in the early hours of the morning, my head resting on the laptop keyboard, as if physical proximity to these revelations might somehow make them comprehensible. I dreamed of my mother on a distant beach, waving to me from the shoreline as I tried to swim toward her, the current always pulling me back no matter how desperately I fought against it. I awoke to sunlight streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close, and the insistent buzzing of my phone. Detective Reynolds was calling, his voice urgent when I answered. "Eleanor, don't go to that meeting with Agent Foster today." "What? Why not?" I asked, disoriented from too little sleep and too many revelations. "Because I just ran her credentials, and Diane Foster doesn't exist. At least, not in the FBI database." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone had already been watching, waiting for me to discover the truth, and now they knew I was looking. "My mother's laptop," I said, suddenly remembering the letter. "I found something last night. A message meant for me if things went wrong." She implied she was running from someone, that her entire identity as Veronica Reynolds was a fabrication. "Don't tell me anything else over the phone," the detective interrupted. "Pack a bag, grab the laptop, and meet me at the bus station in an hour. We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out what we're dealing with." As I hastily threw clothes into a duffel bag, my mind raced with possibilities, each more alarming than the last. Was my mother a criminal? A witness in hiding? A spy? The woman who had packed my lunches and attended my graduations, who had nursed me through chicken pox and heartbreaks, suddenly seemed like a stranger. I grabbed the insurance check from the counter, folding it into my wallet alongside my ID and credit cards. Whatever game my mother was playing, the rules were clearly dangerous. But two could play at disappearing, and I had learned from the best. I arrived at the bus station with minutes to spare, my heart pounding as I scanned the crowd for Detective Reynolds. The terminal buzzed with travelers, each face a potential threat in my newly paranoid world. When a hand gripped my elbow, I nearly screamed before recognizing the detective's weathered face. "Don't look around," he murmured, guiding me toward a side exit rather than the main bus platforms. "My car's out back. The meeting was a trap. Someone's been monitoring your mother's case file." Outside, rain pelted the pavement as we hurried to his unmarked sedan. Once inside, he handed me a burner phone. "Your regular cell is probably compromised. Use this if we get separated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." "Who are these people?" I asked, clutching my duffel bag against my chest like a shield. "What does this have to do with my mother?" Detective Reynolds pulled onto the highway, checking his rearview mirror with practiced vigilance. "I made some calls after our coffee meeting yesterday. Your mother's supposed drowning wasn't the only suspicious death with similar patterns. There have been at least 3 others in the past decade, all professional women, all presumed dead in accidents where the body was never recovered, all with substantial insurance policies paid out to next of kin." The implications settled over me like a shroud. "You think my mother was part of some kind of organized fraud ring?" He shook his head, merging onto the interstate, heading north instead of south toward the FBI field office where the fake Agent Foster had arranged our meeting. "It's more complicated than simple fraud. The patterns don't fit. In each case, the deceased had expertise in fields that certain governments or private organizations might find valuable: cybersecurity, biochemical research, international finance. Your mother was a high school English teacher on paper, but I found records of her receiving a PhD in applied cryptography 20 years ago, before you were born." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. That's impossible. She was barely computer literate. She still wrote lesson plans by hand because she didn't trust cloud storage. Quote, "That's the persona she cultivated," he corrected gently. The question is why a woman with her qualifications would spend decades hiding in plain sight as an English teacher in suburban Florida. I thought of her laptop, nestled in my bag, and the mysterious letter alluding to danger and assumed identities. "Where are we going?" I asked, noticing we had passed the city limits. I have a cabin in the Appalachians. Off-grid, hard to find unless you know it's there. We'll be safe while we figure this out." He paused, glancing at me. "I'm sorry to drag you into this, Eleanor, but whoever sent that fake agent knows you're looking for your mother. You're not safe in your apartment anymore." The reality of my situation sank in. Within 24 hours, I had gone from a marketing executive, grieving her mother, to a fugitive fleeing unknown threats connected to a woman who might never have existed as I knew her. The mundane concerns of my former life, client deadlines, dinner reservations, dating apps, seemed to belong to another person entirely. As miles of highway unspooled beneath us, I opened my mother's laptop, determined to find more answers. The letter had mentioned certain people who posed a danger if they discovered she was alive. Who were they? And why would they care about a middle-aged English teacher presumed dead for 3 years? Digging deeper into the hidden folders, I discovered a trove of encrypted files that required passwords I didn't have. But in a document titled Emergency Protocols was a list of storage unit locations across 5 states, each with corresponding access codes and inventory lists. She had bug-out locations prepared. I murmured, showing Detective Reynolds the document at our next gas station stop. Cash reserves, identity documents, weapons. This isn't amateur preparation. He studied the list, his expression grim. Your mother was intelligence community. Had to be. This is tradecraft, not the work of a civilian. CIA? I asked. The possibility both shocking and strangely fitting given the methodical thoroughness that had defined her character. Or private sector, he suggested. There are organizations that recruit from intelligence agencies, offering better pay for similar skill sets without government oversight. Either way, she was running from something significant enough to abandon her entire life, including you. The hurt of that abandonment resurfaced, a wound still raw despite the revelations reshaping my understanding of her. Why not take me with her? Why let me believe she was dead? Protection, most likely, he said, his tone softening. If she was being hunted, separating herself from you created distance. As long as you genuinely believed she was dead, your reactions would be authentic to anyone watching. It might have been the only way she knew to keep you safe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The explanation offered cold comfort as we continued our journey into the mountains, the terrain growing steeper and the settlements more sparse. By nightfall, we had reached Detective Reynolds' cabin, a sturdy structure of timber and stone nestled among towering pines. Inside was surprisingly comfortable. A wood stove, well-stocked pantry, solar-powered electricity, and satellite internet access. This place doesn't exist on paper, he explained, locking and securing the entrance. Paid cash 20 years ago through a shell corporation. Not even my ex-wife knows about it. As he prepared a simple meal, I continued examining the files on my mother's laptop, focusing on the storage unit inventories. One entry caught my attention. A location in Asheville, North Carolina, less than 2 hours from our current position, containing what was described only as insurance policy documentation. I think I know where to start looking for answers, I said, showing him the entry. This location is close, and the description suggests it contains information she considered important. Detective Reynolds considered the information, weighing risks against potential rewards. We could check it out tomorrow, but we need to be careful. If others are monitoring these storage facilities, we could be walking into a trap. That night, sleep eluded me despite physical exhaustion. I lay on the cabin's spare bed, listening to the unfamiliar chorus of mountain wildlife outside the window, my mind replaying memories of my mother through the lens of these new revelations. Had there been signs I'd missed? Moments when the mask of Veronica Reynolds, dedicated teacher and mother, had slipped to reveal glimpses of her true self? I recalled her insistence on certain security measures I'd found excessive. The elaborate home alarm system, the monthly drills on what to do in various emergency scenarios, her adamant refusal to maintain social media accounts or allow photos of herself online. Digital footprints are forever, she'd warned me countless times. Once your image is out there, you can never truly retrieve it. I'd attributed these quirks to an older generation's discomfort with technology, never suspecting they stemmed from professional paranoia honed through covert operations training. The mother who had taught me to make her grandmother's lasagna recipe and helped me navigate childhood friendships had simultaneously been a woman capable of meticulously planning her own death and disappearance. Morning arrived with thin mountain light filtering through pine boughs. Detective Reynolds was already awake, making coffee and studying topographical maps of the surrounding area. "I've been thinking about our approach," he said as I joined him at the rustic kitchen table. "The storage facility will have surveillance. We need to avoid facial recognition if possible." He produced 2 sets of disguises: hats, sunglasses, and clothing different from our usual styles. These won't fool a dedicated observer up close, but they might be enough to avoid triggering automated systems or casual recognition. We set out after breakfast, taking winding back roads toward Asheville. The detective's caution proved contagious, and I found myself scanning for vehicles that maintained pace behind us for too long or appeared multiple times along our route. This new hypervigilance felt foreign yet instinctive, as though some dormant genetic memory from my mother had awakened in response to danger. The storage facility was unremarkable, a sprawling complex of standardized units surrounded by chain-link fencing, topped with barbed wire. Detective Reynolds parked in a blind spot relative to the visible security cameras, and we approached the side entrance with measured casualness, neither hurrying nor lingering. The access code from my mother's file worked, the electronic lock clicking open with mechanical indifference to the tension humming through my body. Unit 317 was located in the facility's rear section, away from the office and main entrance. Inside, we found not the haphazard collection of personal belongings typical of storage units, but a meticulously organized archive. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, while vacuum-sealed containers labeled by year occupied metal shelving units. A desk with a locked drawer stood in the center, bearing only a lamp and a framed photograph turned face down. I lifted the photo, my breath catching as I recognized myself at my college graduation, standing beside my mother. She had marked this space as hers with this single personal item, a reminder of what she had sacrificed in whatever game she was playing. Detective Reynolds began examining the filing cabinets while I turned my attention to the desk drawer. It required a key we didn't have, but years of watching crime shows had taught me to check obvious hiding places first. Sure enough, taped to the underside of the desk was a small key that fit perfectly. The drawer contained a single manila envelope addressed to Eleanor Reynolds, contingency only. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, revealing a handwritten letter and several sealed, smaller envelopes inside. "My darling daughter," the letter began. "If you're reading this, you've discovered I'm still alive, and you're asking questions that place you in danger. I never wanted this for you, but I always knew this day might come, which is why I prepared this contingency." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself to continue reading. "The truth is complicated and spans decades before your birth. The simplest version is this. I was recruited out of graduate school by a private intelligence firm called Quantum Analytics. For 15 years, I worked developing encryption systems for various clients, including foreign governments. When I discovered certain technologies I'd created were being used for human rights abuses, I attempted to expose the organization." I paused, glancing at Detective Reynolds, who was listening intently while continuing to search the files. "They tried to eliminate me," the letter continued. "I escaped with evidence of their operations, which became my insurance policy. As long as I remained dead and the evidence stayed secured in multiple locations, they left me alone. I created a new life, met your father, had you my greatest joy and deepest vulnerability." The narrative continued, explaining how after my father abandoned us, she'd lived in constant fear that Quantum would discover her identity and use me as leverage. When she received intelligence that they were close to finding her, she executed her escape plan, believing a clean break would keep me safe through genuine ignorance. "The smaller envelopes contain everything you need," the letter concluded. "Coordinates to the evidence caches. Contact information for allies who can help." account numbers for emergency funds. But Eleanor, my brave girl, consider carefully before proceeding. You can walk away now, return to your life, and remain safe through distance from me. Or you can use these tools to find me, knowing that doing so connects you irrevocably to my dangerous past. Whatever you choose, know that everything I've done, including letting you believe I was dead, came from a place of desperate love. Always, Mom. I set the letter down, emotions warring within me, anger at her deception, understanding of her impossible position, fear of the forces arrayed against us, and beneath it all, a stubborn flicker of hope that I might see her again. Reynolds, the detective called urgently from the filing cabinet. You need to see this. He held a folder containing surveillance photos, recent ones, of me entering my apartment building, meeting clients at coffee shops, visiting my doctor. Each was dated and annotated with observations about my routine and habits. Someone's been watching you, he said grimly. For months, judging by these. They knew you'd eventually lead them to her. The realization struck with brutal clarity. I hadn't discovered the truth through clever detective work or coincidence. The second insurance notice had been deliberately sent to me, a calculated move to reveal my mother's survival in a way that would prompt me to search for her. It's a setup, I whispered, the elaborate nature of the trap becoming clear. They couldn't find her on their own, so they're using me as bait. They wanted me to find this place, to get these clues. Detective Reynolds nodded, already gathering the materials into my bag. We need to go. Now. As if on cue, the facility's exterior alarm began wailing, and through the unit's small window we glimpsed dark-clothed figures moving efficiently through the complex. Back exit, the detective said, moving toward a service door I hadn't noticed. Most facilities have maintenance corridors. Stay low and follow me. We slipped through the door into a narrow passageway used by staff to access electrical panels and plumbing. The detective moved with practiced ease, suggesting this wasn't his first evasion of pursuit. At the corridor's end, a metal door opened onto a loading area behind the facility. We were halfway to the tree line when the first shot cracked through the air, splintering bark inches from my head. Detective Reynolds pushed me forward, drawing his service weapon and returning fire to cover our retreat. Don't stop, he commanded as we plunged into the forest. Head uphill, harder for them to maintain pursuit on an incline. The mountain terrain that had seemed picturesque hours earlier now became our salvation, its steep slopes and dense underbrush creating natural obstacles for our pursuers. We moved steadily upward, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as we utilized the detective's knowledge of wilderness evasion techniques. After what felt like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, we reached a ridgeline offering momentary respite and a vantage point. Below, we could see figures still searching the forest's edge, but their organized pursuit had devolved into a scattered effort across too much territory. They'll regroup and set up roadblocks, Detective Reynolds said between labored breaths. We can't go back to the cabin or your apartment. We need a new plan. I opened my bag, retrieving the smaller envelopes from my mother's contingency package. One was labeled simply Emergency Extraction and contained a single business card with a phone number and the words Mention Protocol Lazarus. Quote, It's another of her preparations, I explained, showing him the card. Worth a try? He nodded, looking grim but resigned. At this point, we're running out of options. Using the burner phone, I dialed the number, my voice steadier than I expected when a man answered with a curt, Verification? Protocol Lazarus, I responded. Eleanor Reynolds requesting extraction. The line went silent for several seconds before the man spoke again. Authentication phrase? I glanced at the detective in panic. My mother hadn't provided any authentication phrase. But then I remembered her letter, and on instinct replied, Everything from a place of desperate love. Another pause then, confirmed. Coordinates? Detective Reynolds helped me relay our approximate location based on topographical features. The man on the phone provided simple instructions. Reach the logging road 2 miles northwest of your position. Extraction in 90 minutes. Bring only essentials. You'll be searched. The call ended abruptly, leaving us with a lifeline that required trust in unknown entities connected to my mother's clandestine past. The detective checked his watch. then studied the terrain. "That way," he said, pointing through the trees. "If we maintain pace, we should reach the logging road with time to spare." As we hiked through the mountain wilderness, a strange calm settled over me. After 3 years believing my mother was dead, followed by the whirlwind revelations of the past 48 hours, I was moving towards something concrete. Whether reunion or answers remained unclear, but the passive grief that had defined my existence was giving way to active pursuit of truth. "Why are you helping me?" I asked the detective as we paused to drink from a mountain stream. "This goes way beyond professional obligation. You could lose your job, or worse." He was quiet for a moment, refilling our water bottles before responding. 20 years ago, I worked a case involving a woman who disappeared under circumstances similar to your mother's. The evidence pointed to foul play by a private military contractor, but the investigation was shut down from above. I was told to drop it or lose my badge. He met my eyes directly. "I always suspected she was silenced because she knew something damaging. Helping you feels like making amends for the case I couldn't solve." The personal connection explained his immediate willingness to believe my seemingly outlandish story, his preparedness with the off-grid cabin and evasion techniques. Like me, he had been haunted by unanswered questions, by the shadow of powerful interests manipulating lives with impunity. We reached the logging road with 30 minutes to spare, concealing ourselves in the underbrush while watching for approaching vehicles. When a black helicopter appeared over the tree line rather than the ground transport I'd expected, Detective Reynolds tensed beside me. "Private military," he muttered. "High-end extraction. Your mother has serious connections." The helicopter landed in a clearing 50 yards away, rotors continuing to spin as a woman in tactical gear emerged and scanned the tree line with binoculars. She was heavily armed but moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to operations in contested territory. "That's our ride," I said, gathering my courage along with my bag. "Coming?" The detective hesitated, weighing final calculations of risk and trust. "I'll follow in my own vehicle," he decided. "Better to have backup plans in case this goes sideways. We'll maintain contact through the burner phones." We exchanged brief, fierce hugs, the shared danger having forged a bond that transcended our short acquaintance. Then I stepped out onto the logging road, walking steadily toward the helicopter and whatever awaited beyond. Perhaps my mother? Perhaps those who wished her harm, but certainly the truth I'd been denied for too long. The tactical woman spotted me immediately, her posture shifting to alert readiness as she assessed whether I represented the expected extraction target or a potential threat. As I drew closer, she spoke into a communications device before addressing me. "Eleanor Reynolds?" she called over the rotor noise. I nodded, clutching my bag tighter. "I'm Marianne," she said, her expression softening slightly. "Your mother sent me. We need to move quickly." As she ushered me toward the helicopter, I cast one last glance toward the forest where Detective Reynolds remained hidden, a final anchor to the world I was leaving behind. Then I ducked beneath the rotors and climbed aboard, strapping into a seat beside Marianne as the pilot lifted us smoothly into the afternoon sky. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the engine noise. Marianne handed me a headset through which I could hear her response clearly. "To the one place quantum analytics can't reach either of you. After that, it's your mother's decision how much you learn." As the mountains fell away beneath us, I realized I had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return to my former life. Whatever awaited at our destination, reunion, revelation, or further betrayal, I was finally active in my own story rather than a passive victim of my mother's elaborate deception. The helicopter banked sharply westward, carrying me toward answers 3 years in the making, and a woman who had loved me enough to let me hate her memory if it meant keeping me safe. The helicopter thundered over mountain ridges and valleys, carrying me farther from the life I'd known and closer to the truth I'd been denied. Marianne remained silent beside me, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. After nearly 2 hours of flight, we began descending toward what appeared to be an isolated compound nestled in a mountain valley, surrounded by dense forest and protected by natural rock formations on 3 sides. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Marianne said as we touched down on a helipad marked only with a simple white X. one of the few truly secure locations left in the continental United States. No digital footprint, no utility connections to outside grids, and a security system that would make Fort Knox envious. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As the rotors slowed, two armed guards approached the helicopter, flanking a tall woman whose silver-streaked auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore practical hiking boots and tactical pants with a simple blue button-down shirt, the uniform of someone prioritizing function over appearance. Despite the 3 years and significant changes to her appearance, I recognized her instantly. My mother. Her face, once softly rounded, had become angular and weathered. New lines framed her eyes and mouth, speaking of stress and vigilance rather than laughter. But when those eyes, the same deep green as my own, met mine, I saw a flash of the woman who had raised me, who had celebrated my triumphs and soothed my disappointments throughout childhood. I stepped from the helicopter onto solid ground, the distance between us both physical and emotional. 3 years of grief, followed by betrayal and danger, had crystallized into a moment where neither of us seemed to know how to begin. "Eleanor," she said finally, her voice rougher than I remembered, "you shouldn't have come looking for me." The words stung, despite their pragmatic truth. After everything, this was her greeting. Not an apology, not an embrace, but a rebuke for finding her alive. "And you shouldn't have faked your death," I countered, matching her detachment. But here we are. Something flickered across her features, pride perhaps at my backbone, or regret at the circumstances that had hardened me. Without another word, she turned and began walking toward the main building, clearly expecting me to follow. The compound consisted of several structures built to blend with the natural environment. Solar panels and wind turbines provided power, while gardens and greenhouses suggested self-sufficiency. Everything spoke of careful planning for long-term isolation, a fortress designed not just for physical safety, but for disappearance from the digital age's relentless surveillance. We entered what appeared to be a command center, where monitors displayed security feeds and topographical maps. My mother dismissed the staff with a gesture, waiting until we were alone before facing me again. "You've put yourself in grave danger by coming here," she began, leaning against a desk. "The people hunting me won't hesitate to use you as leverage." "You mean quantum analytics? The people you stole from after discovering they were committing human rights abuses?" I asked, watching her reaction carefully. "I found your contingency package." She stiffened slightly, then nodded. "Part of the truth, but not all of it. Please, sit. This will take some time to explain." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I took the offered chair, maintaining emotional distance even as my heart raced with conflicting desires to embrace her and rage at her deception. She remained standing, perhaps more comfortable with the physical advantage it provided, old habits of a woman who had spent decades calculating power dynamics. "I was recruited by quantum analytics during graduate school," she began, confirming what I'd read in her letter. "They identified me as someone with exceptional aptitude for cryptography and pattern recognition. The work was fascinating, the pay extraordinary, and the security clearance made me feel important. I developed encryption systems that were supposedly for diplomatic communications and financial security." She paused, her expression darkening. 8 years in, I discovered some of my systems were being used to track dissidents in authoritarian regimes, to hide evidence of detention centers, to encrypt communications for trafficking operations. When I raised concerns internally, I was told that was simply the cost of doing business with certain valuable clients. "So you stole evidence to expose them," I supplied, filling in the narrative. "I tried to do the right thing," she corrected. "I compiled evidence and attempted to contact journalists, but Quantum has deep connections in media and government. Before I could release anything, I discovered they had sent a team to retire me, their euphemism for assassination. The clinical way she described an attempt on her life sent chills through me. This was not the mother who had helped with science fair projects or baked cookies for my classroom. This was a woman who had moved in shadows I couldn't comprehend. I went underground, using skills I'd learned from colleagues in field operations. For several years, I lived a nomadic existence, moving between safe houses with different identities. Then I met your father at a conference where I was posing as a literature professor. Her expression softened slightly at the memory. He was kind, uncomplicated, with no connection to my former world. For the first time in years, I felt normal. When I became pregnant with you, I decided to build a permanent cover identity as Veronica Reynolds, to give you stability. Did he know? I asked, the question that had been haunting me. Did my father know who you really were? She shook her head. No one knew. That was the only way to keep both of you safe. When he left us, it wasn't because of anything related to my past. He simply wasn't prepared for the responsibilities of fatherhood. In a way, his departure made maintaining my cover easier, though it broke my heart to see you hurt by his abandonment. The revelation that my father's departure had been exactly what I'd always believed, simple cowardice rather than some spy novel complication, was strangely grounding amid the cascade of other truths being overturned. For 18 years, I lived as Veronica Reynolds, English teacher and single mother. She continued. I maintained surveillance protocols and kept emergency measures updated, but I truly believed I had successfully disappeared from Quantum's radar. I built a life I loved, with you at the center of it. Then what changed? I prompted when she fell silent, lost in remembrance of our former life. 3 years ago, I identified a digital intrusion in the school district's personnel database. Someone was running advanced facial recognition against staff photos, including mine. The search parameters matched Quantum's methodologies. They had finally found me, or were close enough that discovery was imminent. She straightened, meeting my eyes directly. I had 72 hours to disappear before a field team would arrive. I could have taken you with me, but that would have meant throwing you into a life of constant movement, false identities looking over your shoulder. You had your career, your friends, a normal life. I couldn't bear to destroy that. So you chose to let me think you were dead instead. The hurt resurfaced, raw, despite the logical justification. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I grieved you for 3 years. Grief ends, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. Pursuit by Quantum doesn't. As long as you genuinely believed I was dead, your reactions would be authentic to anyone watching. Your safety depended on your ignorance. Then why the insurance policy in my name? Why risk exposure? To provide for you, she answered simply. I couldn't leave you with nothing after taking myself away. The policy was arranged through channels unconnected to Quantum. It should have been untraceable. Well, something went wrong, I said, recounting the second policy notice with her recent signature that had started my journey. They used it to manipulate me into looking for you. My mother's expression changed, calculation replacing reminiscence. Show me the document. I retrieved it from my bag, watching as she examined it closely, her brow furrowing with each passing second. This is a forgery, she said finally. A sophisticated one, but definitely fake. The policy exists, but this disbursement notice was created to lure you into investigating. Quantum couldn't find me on their own, so they used you as a bloodhound. The revelation confirmed my suspicions from the storage unit, but hearing it from her lips made the manipulation more galling. They've been watching me for months, taking surveillance photos, tracking my movements. They knew eventually I'd lead them to you. She nodded grimly, which is why you can never leave this compound. Once Quantum realizes you've disappeared, they'll dedicate significant resources to finding you, knowing you're now with me. The finality of her statement hit me with unexpected force. In my determination to uncover the truth, I hadn't fully considered the consequences, that finding my mother might mean losing my own freedom permanently. What about Detective Reynolds? I asked, suddenly remembering my ally. He helped me escape when they tried to trap us at the storage facility. He's still out there, potentially exposed. Marcus Reynolds, my mother said, surprising me with her recognition of the name. Former FBI liaison to intelligence services before returning to local law enforcement. One of the few honest men I encountered during my time with Quantum. If he helped you, it's because he recognized something in your situation that resonated with his own experiences. She moved to a computer terminal, typing rapidly. I'll have a team extract him if possible, though he may have gone to ground using his own protocols. Men like Reynolds generally have contingency plans. The efficiency with which she mobilized resources to protect someone solely because I expressed concern for them offered a glimpse of the mother I remembered, the woman who would move mountains to shield those she cared about from harm. As she coordinated the potential extraction, I wandered to the windows overlooking the compound. People moved with purpose between buildings, some carrying equipment, others tending gardens or maintaining security perimeters. This hidden community appeared to be a small but complete society, separated from the world I had known. "How many people live here?" I asked when she finished her call. 27 permanent residents, she replied. Former intelligence operators, whistleblowers, specialists with skills Quantum would exploit. All people who needed to disappear completely. "And you run this place?" A small smile touched her lips. "Co-founder and head of security. My encryption systems protect our communications and digital footprint. Sanctuary exists because powerful people want it to remain hidden. We have allies in unexpected places who recognize the danger organizations like Quantum pose to global stability." The scope of what she had built during her death was impressive, suggesting a woman of far greater capability and vision than the mother I thought I had known. Veronica Reynolds, high school English teacher, had been a carefully constructed facade concealing a brilliant strategist and survivor. "What happens now?" I asked, the immediate danger having given way to the larger question of our future. She sighed, for the first time looking truly tired. "That depends on whether Quantum traced you here. If they did, we may need to abandon Sanctuary and relocate our community. If not, we continue our work, monitoring Quantum's operations, gathering evidence, and protecting those they would exploit or eliminate." "And us?" I pressed. "What happens to us?" The question hung between us, weighted with 3 years of separation and decades of secrets. "That's your decision, Eleanor," she said softly. "I've taken enough choices from you. You can return to your life with a new identity and security protocols, though that carries significant risk. Or you can stay here, become part of what we're building. Either way, things can never go back to what they were." The offer was simultaneously generous and devastating. Acknowledgement of my autonomy coupled with confirmation that the relationship we once shared was irretrievably altered. The mother who had raised me had been partly authentic and partly constructed. The woman before me now was a stranger in familiar skin. "I need time," I said, the emotional whiplash of the past days catching up to me. "This is a lot to process." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, Marianne will show you to quarters where you can rest. We'll talk again when you're ready." As Marianne led me across the compound to a small but comfortable cabin, my mind whirled with competing emotions and considerations. The life I had built, my career in marketing, my friends, my apartment with its carefully chosen furnishings, seemed impossibly distant, belonging to a version of Eleanor Reynolds who had died the moment she opened that fraudulent insurance notice. The cabin contained basic necessities and a few books on a shelf above the bed. I recognized one immediately, a collection of Emily Dickinson poems my mother had often read to me as a child. Opening it, I found a pressed flower between the pages marking, "Hope is the thing with feathers." Our favorite poem, a small connection to the woman who had raised me, hidden within this fortress of secrets. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with helicopter pursuits and faceless operatives. When morning came, I emerged to find the compound already bustling with activity. Marianne met me outside my cabin, offering to show me around while my mother attended to security concerns. The tour revealed Sanctuary to be even more impressive than my initial impression. Beyond the visible buildings lay underground facilities, housing research laboratories, communications centers, and emergency bunkers. The residents included former military specialists, computer scientists, medical professionals, and others whose skills made them valuable to both Quantum and this resistance movement. "Most of us were recruited by your mother," Marianne explained as we walked through hydroponic gardens producing fresh vegetables. She has an uncanny ability to identify people who are both exceptionally skilled and ethically troubled by how their work is being used. She offers an alternative, using those same skills to counteract organizations that exploit technology and intelligence for profit regardless of human cost. You speak highly of her, I observed. How long have you known her? 6 years. She extracted me from a private military company in Eastern Europe, where I was training security forces that were actually being used as death squads. When I tried to report it internally, I was scheduled for retirement. Your mother intercepted the kill order and got me out before they could execute it. The story echoed my mother's own, suggesting a pattern of rescue and recruitment that had formed this community of refugees from the shadow world of private intelligence. She never stopped talking about you, Marianne added, surprising me. She kept a journal with entries addressed to you, recording things she wished she could share. Major developments in our work, but also small observations she thought would make you smile. The separation devastated her, even though she believed it necessary for your protection. The revelation that my mother had maintained this one-sided communication, preserving our connection even when actual contact was impossible, pierced the armor of hurt I'd built around my heart. It suggested the deception had cost her nearly as much as it had cost me. When we returned from the tour, my mother was waiting at my cabin, a leather-bound journal in her hands. Marianne told me she mentioned this to you, she said, holding it out. It's yours if you want it. 3 years of everything I couldn't say directly. I accepted the journal, feeling its weight, physical and emotional, in my hands. Thank you, I said simply, not yet ready to forgive completely, but acknowledging the gesture. There's something else you should see, she continued, her expression grave. We've received intelligence about Quantum's next move. It concerns Detective Reynolds. In the command center, she brought up satellite imagery showing a police blockade on the mountain roads near where we had escaped. They're using law enforcement cover to search for both of you, claiming Reynolds has gone rogue and kidnapped a civilian. They've issued bulletins identifying him as armed and dangerous, potentially experiencing a psychiatric break. The manufactured narrative was clever, isolating the detective by turning his own colleagues against him, while providing Quantum operatives with official cover to pursue us. Can we warn him? I asked, concerned for the man who had risked everything to help me. We're trying, my mother replied. But he's gone completely dark. No cell signal, no credit card usage, no digital footprint since your separation. It's actually encouraging. It means he's using proper evasion techniques. As we monitored the situation, an alert sounded from another terminal. One of the technicians called my mother over, pointing to something on the screen. Her expression hardened as she read the information. They found one of my evidence caches, she announced to the room. The facility in Montreal was just breached. They're systematically working through the locations from your mother's contingency package. The implication was clear. Quantum was advancing methodically, using information they had somehow extracted from my brief possession of the contingency envelopes. They were dismantling my mother's insurance policy piece by piece, eliminating the evidence that had kept her safe for years. How did they know about Montreal? I asked, confusion giving way to a sickening realization. I never opened that envelope. The only one I accessed was the emergency extraction contact. My mother turned to me, her expression unreadable. Did you ever let those envelopes out of your sight? Even for a moment? I thought back to the frantic escape from the storage facility, the helicopter extraction, the journey to Sanctuary. Only when I was searched before boarding the helicopter, I admitted. Marianne took my bag while I was being scanned for tracking devices. All eyes in the command center turned to Marianne, who stood by the door with her hand now resting too casually near her sidearm. My mother gave an almost imperceptible nod to someone behind me, and in the next instant, security personnel had restrained Marianne before she could draw her weapon. How long have you been working for them? My mother asked, her voice deadly calm as she approached the woman who had apparently betrayed us. Marianne's demeanor transformed. The loyal lieutenant replaced by cold calculation. Long enough to learn most of your operation. Quantum recruited me 6 months after you brought me here. They made a compelling offer. Betrayal in exchange for a new identity and enough money to disappear permanently. And the helicopter extraction? Was that part of their plan? I asked, struggling to understand how deeply the deception went. They wanted to confirm your mother's location, Marianne replied with clinical detachment. I was supposed to signal once I had visual confirmation of sanctuary. But your mother's counter-surveillance measures blocked transmission. So I photographed the contingency envelopes while searching your bag and memorized the coordinates. Passed them during my scheduled supply run last week. My mother's expression didn't change, but I could sense the calculations running behind her eyes, assessing the damage, formulating responses, preparing for what would come next. Sanctuary is compromised, she announced to the room. Initiate protocol nightfall. Full evacuation within 4 hours. The command center erupted into coordinated activity, personnel moving with practiced efficiency toward predefined responsibilities. My mother turned to me, her professional mask giving way to maternal concern. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I never wanted you caught in this. It's not your fault, I replied, surprising myself with the sincerity of the absolution. Neither of us knew Marianne was compromised. Nevertheless, we need to move quickly. Quantum will have assault teams en route as soon as they confirm Marianne's intelligence. We have a narrow window to evacuate before they arrive. As the community prepared for evacuation, my mother and I retreated to her office to gather essential materials. While she downloaded encrypted files and destroyed physical evidence, I opened her journal, reading random entries that offered glimpses of the woman behind the strategist. Eleanor turned 30 today. One entry read, I watched from distance as she celebrated with friends at that Italian restaurant she loves. She wore the earrings I gave her for her 25th birthday. Some part of me lives on in her choices, her gestures, the way she tilts her head when listening intently. My greatest achievement isn't in cryptography or security systems, but in raising a daughter who radiates kindness and strength in equal measure. The words dissolved the last of my resistance. Whatever deceptions had separated us, whatever complications still lay ahead, the love between us remained genuine, perhaps the only true thing in a world of manufactured identities and calculated betrayals. I've been thinking, I said as she finished securing the last of her files, about what happens after the evacuation. She paused, giving me her full attention. And? I want to stay with you, I said firmly. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I've spent 3 years mourning someone who wasn't actually gone. I'm not willing to lose you again, even if that means living in this shadow world you've created. Relief and concern warred in her expression. It won't be easy, she cautioned. The life you knew is gone. Quantum won't stop hunting either of us now. I know, I acknowledged. But I think I'm my mother's daughter in more ways than I realized. I adapt. I survive. And apparently I have a natural talent for dismantling corrupt organizations. A smile touched her lips, the first genuine one since our reunion. You always were a quick study. She reached for my hand, squeezing it briefly. Together then. As evacuation helicopters arrived to transport Sanctuary's residents to scattered safe houses across the continent, my mother and I boarded the lead aircraft. Below us, the compound that had been her refuge began systematic self-destruction, buildings collapsing into hidden bunkers, equipment erased and buried, all traces of human habitation methodically eliminated. Where are we going? I asked as we rose above the destruction. To meet the others, she replied. People like us who've dedicated themselves to exposing Quantum and similar organizations. Your Detective Reynolds is already there. Our extraction team found him yesterday. He's safe? I asked, relief flooding through me. She nodded. Quote, and eager to help. Apparently his grudge against Quantum runs even deeper than I knew. As the helicopter carried us toward this new chapter, I realized that the mother I had grieved and the woman beside me were finally reconciling into a single, complex individual. Neither the perfect parent of my childhood memories, nor the cold operative who had calculated her own death, but something authentically human in between. The insurance money that had initially revealed her deception now seemed insignificant compared to what I had gained: truth, purpose, and the return of the most important relationship in my life, transformed but unbroken. "I read something in your journal," I said as mountains gave way to plains below us, "about me being your greatest achievement. I want you to know that despite everything, you were never a failure as a mother. Complicated, yes. Secretive, definitely. But you taught me resilience and principle, lessons I'm only now beginning to fully appreciate." She took my hand again, her fingers warm against mine. "And you taught me that some things are worth fighting for beyond abstract ideals or evidence caches. You gave me something to protect that mattered more than my own survival." Together we flew toward an uncertain future, bound not just by blood but by choice. Two women who had lost and found each other against impossible odds, now united in purpose against those who would sacrifice lives for profit and power. The journey ahead would be dangerous, the odds against us substantial. But as we traveled toward the new sanctuary awaiting us, I felt something I hadn't experienced since receiving that first fraudulent insurance notice. Genuine hope that something meaningful could emerge from betrayal, that truth could ultimately prevail over deception. My mother had once faked her death to protect me. Now, together, we would build a new life, dedicated to ensuring others wouldn't face the same impossible choices she had confronted alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.